It is no secret that the Kansas City Chiefs have been on fire the last few years. They have one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history in Patrick Mahomes, a superstar tight end in Travis Kelce, and seemingly anyone who plays in that offense is going to have a good career and win a lot of games along the way. But the franchise can't afford every star player they have, so they continually have to build through the draft and find players who fit their system. In today's video, I want to talk about a player who I think is an absolute steal, has a great story, and could be the next great receiver for the Chiefs in time. His name is Rashee Rice, and at times he was considered the best statistical receiver in college football last year, and either way, is someone worth looking into if you're a Chiefs or NFL fan. Today we're going to talk about how Rice went from a 3-star recruit going to a group of 5 school, and then ended up being a second-round draft pick to this past year's Super Bowl champion. I think he has a great story and has a lot of hype to his name, and we're going to talk all about it. Going back in time to the other side of the country in Philadelphia, as the sun would go down and the lights would come out, kids would stop playing basketball and head home. Except for young Rashee Rice. Alone and empty on the streets, he saw a chance for a new game he'd start to play. He'd end up heading to the streets where the street lights met the darkness, and he would race against his own shadow. He knew the competition wasn't in his favor, but it was a game he loved to play. He said, quote, "Obviously you're eventually going to lose to your own shadow because the light angle changes, but the first 10 yards, man, me and myself would compete." Early on, Rashee Rice was a complete competitor and went at it despite the odds being backed up against him. Going back to 3rd grade, he started playing football and realized pretty quickly he had the talent for it. He remembers a specific play that he would thrive on as a kid. He said, quote, "They would just pitch me the ball, and at that time I didn't really know about first downs, so I was just trying to score every time, and I'd always throw up." Nausea aside, he'd eventually become obsessed with the feeling of finding the end zone. To do that, he knew he'd have to get better as the competition got tougher, and to accomplish it, he tried to model his game after those older than him. At this time, he had also moved to Texas, and future Missouri State star wide receiver Aaron Denton would sort of mentor him up. He would get to Richland High School, and people were talking about Rashee's insane potential. Their head coach, Jed Cates, said he saw Rice's potential when he was in middle school. He noticed his immediate athleticism, but more importantly, he saw something else. He said, quote, "Rashee is extremely intelligent. There are a lot of guys with athletic ability, but their intelligence doesn't translate onto the field or the court or whatever. Rashee's does though." As a junior, a longtime big-time wide receiver recruit Shamar Johnson, Rice would catch 39 passes for 768 yards and 9 touchdowns, while averaging nearly 20 yards per catch. This got his name some exposure, but he wasn't quite at the same level of other 2023 NFL wide receivers at this time. By the time he was getting later in the recruiting process, he started to gain more offers, in schools such as Louisiana Tech, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State were the first schools trying to recruit him pretty hard. What was he looking for besides football? Well, he said, quote, "If I were able to leave there with a high degree, so if I don't make it to the NFL, I can still make a lot of money. I want to major in business, so I want to have connections from the school." Academics were important to Rashee, and after he would gain nearly 30 football offers, he was a hot commodity on the recruiting trail. He visited Nebraska, Minnesota, and SMU, and eventually decided to wrap it all up in favor of the Ponies. He was a 3-star recruit and committed to SMU. He said, quote, "I just get to stay home and play in front of my family and friends, and I think that's pretty cool. We're going to change the program around. I was comfortable with the SMU staff, and it wasn't just one thing that impressed me. There were a lot of different aspects which I liked." He chose SMU over Nebraska, Texas Tech, Missouri, and Arizona State, going for the American Conference instead of a Power 5 school. That is somewhat of a risk, but if he could blow up and become a star, then his stats could be better than anyone else in the conference and could pave his way to the NFL. It was worth the risk in his eyes. At Richland, he'd have an insane season, as he became one of the best receivers in the area, recording 72 catches for 1,386 yards and 19 touchdowns. One of his best games was a 6-catch, 235-yard and 3-touchdown performance to lead his team to victory. In total, Rice would catch 33 touchdowns in his high school career and would record more than 2,800 receiving yards. He was one of the better wide receivers in the state, as according to 24/7 Sports, Rice was listed as a 3-star recruit, the number 101 receiver, and the 817th best player in the class of 2019. He'd be your average receiver for a Power 5 school, but instead, he decided to become a gem for an American school. How would he end up doing at SMU? Well, things would work out for him to say the least. 2019 is when Rashee would arrive in Dallas, and at the time, SMU had fallen on hard times in football, but Sonny Dykes had revived them, and so did former Texas quarterback Shane Buechele. If you don't remember, had a huge start to the season, I believe getting out to a 7-0 record, and Rashee got used to winning and was expected to be good. He ended up finishing his freshman year on a high note, as he caught 24 passes for 361 yards and a touchdown, including a huge career game against Memphis, as he had 7 catches for 122 yards on national television. 2020 would be an even better season for Rice, as he finished with 48 catches for 683 yards and 5 touchdowns, including a couple of other noteworthy performances. He went over 100 yards in back-to-back games against North Texas and Texas State, had 7 catches for 139 yards and a touchdown against Tulane, had 5 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown against a top 10 Cincinnati team, and then 2 touchdowns against Navy. Rice was quickly becoming one of the better receivers in the American Conference, and going into 2021, he'd once again have a lot of hype. He'd end up having a career season, as he finished with 64 catches for 670 yards and 9 scores. He once again torched North Texas, had 2 touchdowns against Louisiana Tech, had 1 against both USF and TCU, and also had 1 against both UCF and number 5 Cincinnati. While he never crossed the 100-yard receiving mark, he was incredibly consistent and was basically a top 2 option each and every game for quarterback Tanner Mordecai. Before the TCU game, Coach Gary Patterson said this: "Rashee Rice is a good football player. I probably should have recruited him and should have offered him, but we didn't. I can't remember the reason why." SMU has actually developed a lot of good receivers over the last few years, so Rice was ready to take on that label. With Danny Gray and Reggie Roberson Jr. off to the NFL, he believed he could be the Ponies' #1 option, and he would try to put himself into the same category as legends such as Emmanuel Sanders and James Prochet. It would help that they got a new wide receivers coach, but at first it didn't start out smooth. They would eventually forge a tight bond. As the receivers coach said, quote, "We butted heads a little bit last year like you always do with great players, because they have to learn to trust you, and the biggest thing is they have to feel like you're going to help them do better." This was the same receivers coach who turned both N'Keal Harry and Brandon Ayuk into first-round picks. While Rice wouldn't end up becoming a first-round pick, he'd still have a pretty good year. He ended up catching 96 passes for 1,355 yards and 10 touchdowns. Through the first couple weeks, he was actually the top statistical wide receiver in the country after an absurd start. He had 28 catches in his first 3 games, had nearly 500 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. His best performance came against Maryland, but unfortunately they weren't winning as many games as you'd think. They ended up losing a close game to TCU and lost on the road to UCF, despite him having 12 catches in that one. He'd take a little bit of a break before he'd explode for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tulsa, had 2 touchdowns against Houston, nearly 100 yards and a touchdown against USF, and in his final game had a career-high 13 catches for 147 yards and a touchdown. Rice was one of the best receivers in all of college football, and what makes his 2022 season even crazier is that he battled turf toe almost the entire season. Eventually, he decided to declare for the 2023 NFL Draft, and when asked about it, he said, quote, "When my phone starts to ring on draft day, I get the opportunity to make plays in the NFL. It's not about whoever gets drafted first, it's about being a playmaker." So, where would Rice end up going? Well, he was selected in the 2nd round by the Kansas City Chiefs, and this surprised a few critics. The pick was, however, no surprise for reigning league MVP Patrick Mahomes. Both Rice and him worked out a little bit in Texas in the pre-draft process, and the Chiefs arguably got one of the best receivers in college football, as Rice led the country in receiving yards per game last year. How will he fit with Mahomes and the Chiefs? Well, he's a combo player. One scout said, quote, "At over 6 feet tall, Rice is taller than most of Kansas City's other receivers. Yet, his college film shows the yard after catch abilities more typical of a smaller, speedier player. He's a guy who combines both skill sets." While Rice does have a lot of hype, will he be able to break through that wall that Chief receiver rookies always seem to hit? Rookie receivers have notoriously had difficult times transitioning to Andy Reid's offense, but Rice believes he has what it takes to make plays for them. He said, quote, "I think I'm comfortable anywhere on the field to where I can get to a mismatch or have the ball in my hands." While Rice might not be the most talked about receiver in this year's draft class, I think he has a chance to be a high-impact player who has a long-term NFL career. He's someone who can do a little bit of everything, has been doubted from the beginning, will go to a franchise with a winning culture, and has one of the best quarterbacks to ever do it throwing him the ball. Rice was awesome to watch at SMU, and unfortunately a lot of us fans missed out on how good he was because the Mustangs never played on national television, but he'll be playing on Sundays, and that's where he'll have the chance to show the world how good he is. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, let me know what player I should cover next, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.